Good evening. My name is Jason Dunn, Chairman of the National Coalition of Black Media Professionals, and I greet you on behalf of the Board of Directors, our members, sponsors, and partners, and in the spirit of our founders. Welcome to the second of the Be Inspired Speaker Series, Ignited the Museum. And as stated yesterday, there are 10 million families affected by COVID-19. And while this pandemic has touched all of us in different ways, both financially and mentally, we created the Be Inspired Speaker Series to remind you of the innovation and tenacity that we all embody as a people, and yes, you as a person. The strength, resiliency, and faith to push on despite our current obstacles is indeed within you. As I listened to the presentation last night from the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, I was reminded of their perseverance, uplift, and unshakable faith. So this evening, we wanted to remind you that we have all been through tough times before, and we will get through this one. Know that we are our ancestors' wildest dreams, and we have come too far to turn back now. We will pick up the pieces and lead this nation, lead our families, and we hope tonight inspires you to straighten your back up, and for the next 45 minutes, remember who you are and whose you are. In honor of Malcolm X's birthday, he said, armed with the knowledge of our past, we can with confidence charter a course for our future. Please welcome Nicholas Wiggins, Senior Consultant at Value Partnerships and our Vice President of the National Coalition of Black Media Professionals, who will serve as this evening's moderator. Nick.
Tonight, we're going to have a wonderful, wonderful presentation of stories of inspiration and courage from the Negro League Baseball Museum, which is in Kansas City, Missouri. And we have with us Bob Kendrick, who is the president and CEO of the museum. Bob, thank you for your support. I'm excited for the conversation we're about to have. And we would just really appreciate you joining us here at NCBMP for this moment.
Hello, how are you?
Wonderful, wonderful.
It's so good to be a part of this. I want to start by thanking the National Coalition of Black Meeting Planners for including the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in what I think is a very important forum. All of these cultural institutions, that's the role that we play. All of our stories are about triumph over adversity. But certainly when we talk about the Negro Leagues, it is I think one of the greatest chapters, not in baseball history, but in American history. And this story is all about overcoming adversity. So as we're dealing with this situation that we're all engaged in, unprecedented situation for all of us, as we look at the impact that COVID-19 is having on all of our businesses, Negro Leagues Baseball Museum included, there is this aspect of hope and courage and determination that is embedded in all of our institutions that we hope will give folks greater wherewithal to deal with what we need to deal with as we ultimately pull ourselves out of this situation. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the heroes of the Negro Leagues and a little bit about Negro Leagues history in general and this great museum that is celebrating its 30th anniversary. Started in a little one-room office, Nicholas, about as big as this area that I'm sitting in right now. And that's how we got started way back in 1990. So wow. We are as grassroots an organization as you will ever encounter. As you well know, most museums start with an endowment already in place. We're so fond of saying that we started with a hope and a prayer. But here we are 30 years later, now recognized as America's national Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, something that we take tremendous pride in. And so before we begin our conversation, I've got a short video that I wanted to have shown so you can get a glimpse of what this great museum is all about. Welcome to the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. It is the world's only museum dedicated to preserving and celebrating the rich history of African-American baseball and its profound impact on the social advancement of America. People come here expecting to meet some pretty good baseball players,
and you're going to leave not being disappointed. You're going to meet some of the greatest athletes to ever play this game. You walk away with an even greater appreciation for just how special this country really is. Because the story of the Negro Leagues could have only happened in America. Yes, it is anchored in the ugliness of American segregation, a horrible chapter in this country's history. But out of segregation rose this wonderful story of triumph and conquest, and is all based on one small, simple principle. You won't let me play with you? Then I'll just create a league of my own. Those leagues, the Negro Leagues, were formed right here in Kansas City. They helped make the game the global game that it is today. And quite frankly, the Negro League didn't care what color you were. All they cared was, can you play? These athletes loved the game of baseball so much that they were willing to endure whatever social adversity confronted them as they traveled the highways and byways of our country just to play baseball. That passion would not only change our sport, but it would change our country. This wonderful, precious piece of baseball and Americana that escaped the pages of American history books. Countless generations of us went through our own formal educations without knowing one of the most significant chapters, not in baseball history, but in American history, the story of the Negro Leagues. By the time you've bared witness to everything that they endured just to play baseball in this country, then the very last thing that happens here is, now you can take the field.
Wow, that was an amazing video, Bob, and there's so much to unpack there. But would love you to just talk more about the museum and how it was founded, and some more information for those of us who have joined us for the conversation tonight.
Well, Nicholas, for those who sometimes wonder why a Negro Leagues museum is in Kansas City, it is really because Kansas City is the birthplace of the Negro Leagues. So the museum is exactly where it's supposed to be, right here in the heart of America, in the heart of historic 18th and Vine, which was once a very proud, prominent African-American community. But like a lot of urban areas, it had died. And you can trace the rise and fall of the Negro Leagues with the rise and fall of many African-American communities in this country, 18th and Vine included. But we decided to build this museum here in 1990, here in this once very prominent African-American community at a time when it had been left abandoned. It had been left to die. And there were a lot of folks who thought you were crazy to build a museum here. Who's going to come? There's no built-in foot traffic. And thanks to the wisdom of the late, great Buck O'Neill, my mentor, my dear friend, and the longtime chairman of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, and a legendary Negro Leaguer in his own right, who said, this is where we will build this museum. This is the area that gave birth to this story, and we will build this museum right here, and in doing so, we will help resurrect what was once a great community. That was 30 years ago, man, and we haven't looked back since. And to see this area start to thrive again, to see people living and playing and working at historic 18th and Vine once again fills us with great pride. And again, the story of the Negro Leagues is about proving people wrong. It was from the get-go. And so I think the Negro Leagues Museum has done just that. And we're very proud about that fact. We could have gone other places. There were better business opportunities for the Negro Leagues Museum. But again, this was never a self-serving proposition. This was about the greater good. And in essence, we've done for this community what Negro Leagues Baseball had done for African-American communities across this country.
Yes, great. And, it's so great that it is in Kansas City. And, I'm excited for the next time we visit, the city to take another tour in the museum. Quick question. So Rube Foster founded, the Negro League. Tell us about that process. How did they think of this concept of the Negro Leagues? And at its height, how many teams were there?
Yeah, it's an amazing story in its own right, because this year marks the 100th anniversary of the birth of the Negro Leagues formed here in Kansas City. And of course, it was the legendary Rube Foster who led a contingent of 8 independent Black baseball team owners into a meeting that took place, Nicholas, at the old Paseo YMCA. The building still stands. As a matter of fact, we've designated it as the future home of the Buck O'Neill Education and Research Center. So we're actually going to expand our operations into the very building that gave birth to the story that we're now charged with preserving. But Rube Foster essentially accomplished what others had attempted to do but had failed. And that was to create a successful, organized Black baseball league. The Negro Leagues would then go on to operate amazingly for 40 years, from 1920 until 1960. When they started the leagues here in Kansas City, it started with 8 teams. By 1923, an additional 8 teams had come into the fold. And of course, by 1924, you had your very first Negro Leagues World Series. And it really was at the urgency of the Black press who had pushed for an organized structure to Black baseball. See, these teams were already formed, but everybody was doing it independently. And the Black press was pushing that in order for Black baseball to survive, it needed an organized body. Rube Foster was able to give it that. And when we talk about Rube Foster, we're talking about perhaps the greatest baseball mind this sport has ever seen that really nobody knows anything about, even though he is rightfully enshrined in the National Baseball Hall of Fame. He was light years ahead of his time. And quite frankly, you can make a case, a legitimate case, that Rube Foster may be the most important figure in baseball history in terms of what he did as a player, what he ultimately did as a manager, and then, of course, as this great executive who brought the Negro Leagues into fruition, and then the impact that these leagues would have, you know, in terms of ultimately not only changing the game, but changing our country.
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, I'm a history buff and taught history for 6 years. So for those, you know, who have joined us, Rube Foster, that's a name that you should know and have, you know, the next generation study, you know, for the impact that he had. And, you know, we talk about hope and a prayer, you know, organizing anything is a difficult process, but definitely organizing something of this magnitude is quite a significant achievement. So you know, you talk about just the fact that he was able to do something that people thought was impossible, but the Negro Leagues brought all sorts of innovations to baseball. You know, I'd love for you to talk about some of those innovations and why they're so important to what we consider baseball to be today.
Yeah, when we talk about the Negro Leagues, and this is one of the things that kind of grabbed people by surprise, the innovations that came out of the Negro Leagues. Nicholas, we can start with the style of play, which was so fast and aggressive and was polar opposite to Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball was essentially a base-to-base kind of game. Guy got on base, you moved him over to second, and then the big hitters came up, and they drove him in. But not in the Negro Leagues. Rube Foster preached this style of play. So they would bunt their way off. They would steal second, they'd steal third, and man, if you weren't too smart, they were stealing home. And fans were flocking, both Black and white fans were flocking to see those games. But advents such as shin guards, the batting helmet, these things all come out of the Negro Leagues. And perhaps the most surprising of them all was the fact that night baseball originated in the Negro Leagues 5 years before they ever played a night game in the major leagues. They were playing them in the Negro Leagues. Now, keep in mind that our history book will tell us that the first professional night baseball game, 1935, Crossley Field, Cincinnati, Ohio, the Cincinnati Reds versus the Philadelphia Phillies. Well, as I always like to say, the history book is wrong. The first professional night baseball game took place in 1930, and it featured our very own Kansas City Monarchs. J.O. Wilkinson, who owned the Monarchs, literally mortgaged everything he had to pioneer night baseball, portable generated light towers. So not only could they play a night game here, they could load them up on the truck and play a night game virtually anywhere. truth of the matter is, Nicholas, by the time they played that game in Cincinnati, the Monarchs and a team called the House of David had taken night baseball all the way out to Seattle. But really, Wilkinson wasn't doing it to be innovative. He was doing it for survival. You see, during that era, Major League Baseball really didn't play on Sundays. So the Negro Leagues would rent the ballpark, play that Sunday doubleheader. We left church, going straight to the ballpark, dressed to the nines, as we say. And so he was looking for a way to get the working class fan into the ballpark. Night baseball became the answer. Night baseball became bigger than Sunday games. And Sunday games were so popular that Black churches would move their service time up an hour.
Wow.
I'm gonna say that again. Black churches would move their service time up an hour, because I know all of you know, you don't mess with service time. Typically in the Black church, 11 o'clock Sunday go to meeting. Well, when the Monarchs played, service started at 10 o'clock and everybody filed out going to that Sunday doubleheader. Night baseball was even bigger than that. But see, here's where the fallacy occurs. American historians never viewed Negro Leagues baseball as having been professional. And so for me, it is like Columbus discovering a country that already had people on it. You can't do it. And so these things took place in the Negro Leagues, but because they were ignored by historians, virtually no one knew this. And so we're very, again, excited to bring these things, no pun intended, to light.
I really absolutely concur with you. And, you know, it just brings up the notion that if we don't tell, you know, our own history, it won't be told properly.
Absolutely. And, you know, one of the things that I talk about all the time is if you don't control the pen, you don't control the story. And thus our story has never been written with the kind of accuracy or relevancy that it should be. And that's what makes these cultural institutions so vitally important, because if it's not for these institutions, no one would ever know. You know, ultimately, we hope to rewrite the pages of American history books so that it reflects our complete story. And that's certainly one of the charges of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum.
Absolutely. And one of our responsibilities as meeting professionals of color is to make sure that we incorporate this into our meetings that come to Kansas City. So, you know, absolutely. But, you know, tell us some more about, you know, I'm fascinated by all of this. We could talk for hours, but we only have a short amount of time. Tell us a little bit more about some of the stars that played in the Negro Leagues. And I know there are so many, but if you could tell us, you know.
Oh yeah, and we'll try to run through these pretty quick so we have time to answer a few questions. But, you know, for me, it starts with the legendary James Thomas Cool Papa Bell. First and foremost, y'all, the greatest nickname in baseball history, bar none. Cool Papa is still believed to be the fastest man to ever play this game. Clocked him in an amazing 12 seconds, circling the bases from home to home. His good friend Satchel Paige would say of Cool that he was so fast, he could walk in a room, turn off the lights, get in bed, pull up the covers before the room went dark. But as I tell my guests all the time, you don't have to fix the live speed of Cool. He once stole 175 bases in a less than 200 game season. Twice, honest to God's truth, twice scored from first base on a bunt in exhibition games against Major League All-Stars. Yeah, the speed was legendary and Cool was cool. And of course, we talk about the legendary Oscar Charleston. And Oscar Charleston is not a household name, but he should be. My dear friend, the late great Buck O'Neill, would say without hesitation that Oscar Charleston was the greatest baseball player he ever saw. Now, he thought Willie Mays to be the greatest major leaguer, and most people concur, because Willie Mays could beat you any way you could be beaten. He could beat you with his arm, with his bat, with his glove, with his legs. And of course, Willie Mays' illustrious professional career began in the Negro Leagues with the Birmingham Black Barons. But old Buck believed this man on the screen, Oscar Charleston, to be the greatest baseball player he had ever seen. Oscar Charleston was an early era Negro leaguer who could do it all. The consummate five-tool guy, hit for power, hit for average, could field, could run, could throw. In 1921, he led the Negro Leagues in home runs, triples, doubles, stolen bases, and batting average in the same season. He is rightfully enshrined in the National Baseball Hall of Fame. And of course, the legendary Josh Gibson, who many would call the Black Babe Ruth. But y'all, there were others who saw Gibson play who would call Ruth the white Josh Gibson. Josh was incredible. And as you can see in the photograph, the power was very real. Yeah, you can make an argument that he's the greatest combination of power and average this game has ever seen. He is the only baseball player in the history of our sport to hit the ball completely out of Yankee Stadium. He hit one in the Polo Grounds in New York that they estimated to travel over 600 feet. But see, Gibson wasn't just a great power hitter. Gibson was a great hitter. Lifetime batting average of 354, and in head-to-head competition in countless exhibition games against Major League All-Stars, hit over 420. And what makes it even more remarkable for those of you who are baseball fans, he was doing this as a catcher. Catchers don't do that. No, you get one or the other, power or average, but rarely do you get the combination of the two for any sustained period of time, because the position is so defensively demanding, physically demanding. It beats your body up. He wasn't a good catcher. He was a great catcher. And he swung a 40-ounce, 41-inch bat, man. You got to be a man to do that. He dies tragically at age 35, ironically the same year that Jackie Robinson breaks baseball's color barrier. So he never got that opportunity to fulfill that dream of playing in the major leagues. Wow. And of course, I think the next slide is Satchel Paige.
Yes.
And we could have spent the entire session talking about the legendary Leroy Satchel Paige, arguably the greatest pitcher this sport has ever seen. We know for certain the oldest rookie in the history of Major League Baseball. Now, Major League Baseball says that Satchel was 42 years old when he finally got his opportunity to play for the Cleveland Indians in 1948 as a rookie. Some of you may recall that Cleveland would win the World Series, led by the great Larry Doby and Satchel Paige. Many thought Satchel should have been named Rookie of the Year. He goes 6-1 with a 2.4 ERA his rookie season at age 42, which means he was likely closer to 52. He never told his real age. And quite frankly, y'all, I don't think Satchel knew his real age. And of course, that is not unusual, because there are a lot of folks, particularly African Americans born in the Deep South, who did not know how old they were. Satchel was born in Mobile, Alabama, likely in the early to mid 1890s, although baseball says he was born in 1906, which I absolutely do not believe. The man that died here in 1982, he'd seen 76 a long time ago. He was likely born into the early to mid 1890s in Mobile, Alabama. And like everybody from that era, nobody's born in a hospital. Everybody's born at home to a midwife. And so the birth record was kept back page of the family Bible. And according to Satchel, the goat ate that page out the Bible. So he didn't know how old he was. And as Satchel would whimsically pose the question, how old would you be if you didn't know how old you were? Or that age is simply mind over matter. If you don't mind, it don't matter. A lot of people did not know that there were women to play in the Negro Leagues, 3 of them. And when they put the slide back up, you'll see a painting of Toni Stone, Connie Morgan, and Mamie Peanut Johnson. That's the legendary Toni Stone in the center. To my left, wearing the number 20 jersey, jumping to catch the ball. That's the late, great Mamie Peanut Johnson. And then to my right would be Connie Morgan. They were all pioneers, women who played in the Negro Leagues in the 1950s. And so this surprises a lot of people. And all three were tremendous athletes. I had the great pleasure of knowing Mamie Peanut Johnson and the honor of speaking at her funeral service when she passed away a couple of years ago. There were also female leaders in the Negro Leagues, executives, owners, most notably Effa Manley, the first woman to own and operate a professional baseball team. She and her husband, Abe, owned the Newark Eagles, but it was Mrs. Manley who ran the day-to-day operations of that baseball team, and she knew the business of baseball as well as any man. Great talent play for her. Larry Doby, Monty Irvin, Leon Day, Willie Wells, all in the National Baseball Hall of Fame, all played for Effa Manley's Newark Eagles. And it strikes me that here's a league born out of segregation that will become the driving force for social change in this country. Here's a league born out of exclusion that will become perhaps the nation's most inclusive entity. They didn't care what color you were, and they didn't care what gender you were. Can you play? Do you have something to offer? And really, that's the way it's supposed to be. And so the Negro Leagues, in essence, was out ahead of society.
Absolutely. And so happy you talked about Effa Manley. I am New Jersey
Yes.
raised, and so happy you brought her up. We have a couple questions from the audience that I want to dive into.
Yeah, by all means.
One, someone asked, who were the first two teams that played in the first World Series?
1924 Negro League World Series featured our very own Kansas City Monarchs against the Hilldale Daisies, who were based out of Darby, Pennsylvania. And the Monarchs would win that World Series, becoming this city's first professional sports champion of any kind in 1924. They were led by the legendary Negro League pitcher and Hall of Famer, Wilbur Bullet Joe Rogan. And Bullet Joe was outstanding. He was, along with Oscar Charleston, they were the first two superstars of the Negro Leagues. But yeah, the Monarchs won that World Series in 24. Hilldale came back, though, and beat my guys in 1925, but Bullet Rogan was hurt. That's the only reason they got us. Yeah, but Hilldale had a great ball club with some great players. And of course, the Monarchs always had a great baseball team.
And did these games ever make it to radio?
In the 40s, there was a guy named Jocko Maxwell who became a legendary broadcaster. And so some of those games did make, and particularly those East Coast games like you referenced over in Newark and places like that, in that New York area, they did get a little bit of radio time in the late 40s, into the mid 40s and 50s, as part of Negro League's lore.
And then another question was, besides obviously getting over to Kansas City and, visiting and touring the museum, is there an anthology or a work that you would recommend people, purchase to catch up on a lot of this history?
Yeah, for me, the book that I always recommend, and I think it's one of the great titles of all time, the book is called Only the Ball Was White. And it was written by Robert Peterson. And it's a wonderful kind of comprehensive look at the Negro Leagues. And really the first real major undertaking that Robert Peterson took on. And there are other great projects out there now. And we're excited that there are even more children books that are being written in and around the Negro Leagues, including one called We Are the Ship that features the artwork of my dear friend Kadir Nelson, who also had the nerve to write the book too. I can't stand it, man. I was like, it's one thing to be able to paint these amazing pictures, and then you got the nerve to write the book too. Can't you leave something for the rest of us? But it is a wonderful book. It's a children's book, but it's a book for all ages, and his paintings just really bring it to life.
Absolutely. Thank you for that recommendation. So repeat the title again one more time for me.
Only the Ball Was White.
Only the
and
Ball
then
Was
We
White.
Are the Ship. And of course, both of those titles are available at NLBM.com. We need all the help we can get. So go online and buy it and buy some more swag as well, because we need the help.
You heard where to get those 2 titles at the website. So how far did the Negro Leagues expand as far as across the country? Is Kansas City sort of the westernmost point?
You're absolutely right. Kansas City was as far west as the Negro Leagues went. St. Louis was as far west as Major League Baseball went. So if you lived on the western foremost half of the country, you didn't get to see professional baseball unless it was through barnstorming. And the Negro Leaguers were heralded barnstormers. And for those of you who may be hearing that term for the first time, in this case, it meant that they were taking baseball to towns that had never seen professional baseball. So the Negro Leagues would take baseball into Canada. They were oftentimes the first Americans to play in many Spanish-speaking countries. Believe it or not, it was a touring team of Negro Leaguers that introduced professional baseball to the Japanese, going all the way back to 1927. This is years before Babe Ruth and his All-Stars visit Japan. But they've always been commonly credited with having taken professional baseball to the Japanese, but it's not true. It was a team called the Philadelphia Royal Giants, who would go to Japan in 1927, play a 24-game exhibition series. They go 23-0-1 on the tour. The tour was so successful that several years later, Babe Ruth and his All-Stars would get invited over. And as I always say, as we look at the game today in its global capacity, there are so many ethnicities that make up a Major League roster on any given day. Well, at the heart of it were the Negro Leagues. They helped make the game the global game that it is. They never got credit for it. No, they never got credit for it.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It goes back, and that's a recurring theme of this conversation, is that we have to tell our history. And I hope everyone who's listening to this realizes the importance of telling these stories, and really appreciate you taking the time to go through some of this with us. I wanted to go back to sort of how the Negro Leagues were such an important base of the community. And so we know that, you know, where they thrived, economy thrived. And, you know, I would love for you to talk more about why they were so essential to some of the things that we were doing as a community as a whole.
Yeah, because again, it wasn't uncommon, Nicholas, that these athletes could go into a town, fill up the ballpark, and yet not be able to get a meal from the same fans that had just cheered them, or not have a place to stay. So they would sleep on the bus and eat their peanut butter and crackers until they could find a place that offered basic services. Well, what does this do? It creates need. And so now all of a sudden, Black businesses started to emerge to meet those needs. Negro Leagues baseball was bringing them a built-in clientele that essentially led those Black-owned businesses to their economic heights. Here in Kansas City, the Street Hotel, Black-owned hotel, majestic Black-owned hotel. Yeah, the teams are coming in to play the Monarchs, and they're filling up the place, and it was just the place to be. And you saw this start to kind of manifest itself around the country. Quite frankly, we didn't realize what we were losing when we lost the Negro Leagues. So we lost that catalyst. We lost that economic engine that was bringing that clientele into all of these Black-owned businesses, because when we lost Negro Leagues baseball, we gained integration in this society. Because Jackie Robinson's breaking of the color barrier wasn't just a part of the civil rights movement, it was the beginning of the civil rights movement. And a lot of people did not know that Jackie's illustrious career began right here in Kansas City with the great Kansas City Monarchs, 1945. As a matter of fact, that's the 1945 home jersey that Robinson wore when he played here. So before he was number 42, he was number 5 for the Kansas City Monarchs. But his breaking of the color barrier is what in essence triggered the civil rights movement and integration in our society. And so we asked for integration. What we wanted was equality. Those two things are not the same. And so all of a sudden, these smaller Black-owned businesses could no longer compete with those larger chains, and they essentially perished. And with it, the demise of so many great African-American communities around this country. And so it's a bittersweet story from that standpoint. Yeah, because what was good morally, what was good socially, was devastating economically.
Yeah.
And as I tell my guests, there's always a cost for progress. And in this case, Black businesses paid a dear cost for what was deemed progress.
Yeah, and that's a hugely important point in the conversation and the narrative of this history. You know, you said we sought integration, we wanted equality, but really what we needed was equity.
We needed equity.
Did not, which we did not receive, and we still face ramifications of that today.
The quest is still there. We're still on for those things.
And so as we see sort of the Major League Baseball pick up and integrate, you know, and with Jackie Robinson's story and others, would love for you to share a few seconds, you know, about, you know, that process. More importantly, what it did to the Negro Leagues.
Yeah, absolutely. Because Jackie is the beginning, but he's also the end. He's the end as it relates to the Negro Leagues, because once he breaks the color barrier, he leaves Kansas City and goes into the Brooklyn Dodgers organization. And then, of course, on April 15, 1947, make that monumental walk on the field as a member of the Brooklyn Dodgers, forever changing the game of baseball, but more importantly, forever changing this country. But that then opened up the pipeline for other young African-American ball players to now move into the major leagues. There was no replenishing system. So it wasn't a matter of if, it was simply a matter of when the Negro Leagues were going to dissolve. It hung on for another 13 years after Jackie breaks the color barrier. But teams out in your area, Newark, the New York area, that were really close to major league cities, those teams almost died instantly. The Midwestern-based teams out here in Kansas City, Indianapolis, they were able to hang on a little bit longer because they weren't as close to Major League Baseball cities. Black folks instantly left the Negro Leagues to go see Jackie play. Yeah, because this is what we as a people had been waiting on. So you got to remember, Jackie Robinson's breaking of the color barrier is the equivalent in the African-American community to the first man landing on the moon. That's the reverberation that it had. And we were filling up the ballpark to go see Jackie play. And then subsequently Larry Doby and Satchel and Roy Campanella. And then all of a sudden, this pipeline of young Black stars were now moving into the major leagues. And of course, they had an immediate impact on Major League Baseball. One of the great factoids to me, as it relates to the impact that the Negro Leagues had on Major League Baseball, from 1949 to 1959, 9 of 11 National League most valuable players were former Negro League stars. Wow. That's not counting the rookies of the year. So it had a tremendous impact. But again, at that point, Negro League owners saw the handwriting on the wall. Again, it wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when. So now they started selling their star players to the major leagues, just trying to get what they could get before the business of Black baseball died.
Absolutely. I mean, this is just a fascinating, you know, discussion on our history and probably some history that people don't know. I just want to remind everyone, if you do have questions, please put them in the chat. We have a little bit of time left. We'd love to get all of your questions in. But I would just like to, again, because we are meeting professionals, just tell us a little bit more about the museum. What's your favorite part of the museum? I won't ask you your favorite team because it's clear who your favorite team is. But
I got a little Kansas City bias.
What's your favorite part of the museum?
Well, the Field of Legends. And you saw it in the video where the life-size statues are. It is one, I think, again, and I'm biased, I think it's one of the most amazing displays in any museum anywhere in the world. And I can tell you now, when you make your way to the field, and the only way, Nicholas, that you can get there, you have to earn the right. So you have to basically bear witness to what they had to endure to play baseball in this country. And by the time you walk out on that field, you feel it. You feel it. I mean, it's inspiring. It is inspirational, but it's also very moving and very emotional. I have seen people move to tears when they walk up to those statues and they look into their eyes because they are so amazingly lifelike. They are all based on the height, weight, data information that we had on each of those athletes, and they all represent Negro leaguers who are in the National Baseball Hall of Fame. But my dear friend, the great Ozzie Smith, the Wizard, he was here for our grand opening celebration in November of 1997. And when he walked out on the field, he was moved to tears. He said it was the eeriest feeling he ever had because he realized that he stood on the shoulders of these immortals to become the Wizard, to have that Hall of Fame career. And so often in our society, we celebrate those who cross over the bridge. But here at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, we celebrate the people who built the bridge, who allowed Jackie to transition, who allowed the Ozzie Smiths of the world, the Henry Aarons, and all these other great stars who would go on and make their mark in Major League Baseball.
And so I want to go really quickly to a question that was in the chat. Said, what would it take to resurrect a Negro League of Baseball or a baseball league for people of color? What would it take? Would it be something that you feel would work in the 21st century?
The rationale was the fact that once we integrated the game, that we didn't need two separate leagues. And you would probably get that argument again today. But what we've got to now do is make sure that our children have every opportunity to play this game. We've got to increase our participation in this sport, which means we've got to heighten the interest in this sport. And I tell people all the time, the thing that you love about Major League Baseball is its tradition. The thing that has hurt Major League Baseball is its tradition. The other sports, the NFL and the NBA, have outmarketed our sport. And so when you had the Negro Leagues, it was bold and brass and exciting. I tell people all the time, the Negro Leagues were essentially hip hop in a jazz era. It was rebellious in the way in which they played the game. It was never supposed to last. And not only did it last, it would actually change the game. Well, we've now got to get our young kids excited about this game again. But it's also incumbent upon institutions like the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum to make sure that we bridge the economic gap that has prevented a lot of kids from playing. When I grew up, you played on the sandlots. Well, as you know now, sandlot baseball, and I hate to say it, is a thing of the past. Yeah, if it's played now, it's organized. And when it becomes organized, it's extremely expensive. So we've got to bridge that gap and do everything to make sure that our children are at least having an opportunity to play the game. Now, if you don't like it, you don't like it. But we want to make sure that we build future potential baseball players and create the infrastructure that's necessary for them to find careers in our sport. That's the other side of it.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good way to sort of wrap this conversation, in that we've talked about the history and the importance of the history, the importance of telling our own narrative, and making sure that the proper story is told. And then circling around to the fact that we need to make sure that future generations are able to play this sport. They know their history, but they're able to have the opportunities to play this sport. Want to give you, we're wrapping, want to give you an opportunity to give some closing thought briefly. But this has been an amazing, amazing conversation. And thank you, Bob.
No, it is absolutely my pleasure. And I think you touched on something, and I wholeheartedly believe this. What the Negro Leagues teaches us is so very important. And this is, I think, is a message for our young people. If you dare to dream and you believe in yourself, you can do or be anything you want to be. They dared to dream of playing baseball. They had no idea that they were making history. They didn't care about making history. They just wanted to play ball. But the pride, the passion, the determination, the courage, the perseverance that they demonstrated in the face of adversity. Again, our story is not about the adversity, but rather what they did to overcome the adversity. And that's the real story. And folks, it's a story that transcends race, it transcends age, and it transcends gender. And that's why we believe that the legacy of the Negro Leagues has to play on. And we're proud to keep that legacy alive here at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum.
Absolutely. And I can't wait to get back out to Kansas City once we're through, this current period in our country, and get out to Kansas City and tour the museum. We have some questions that we weren't able to get to, but, there are people excited about making sure that they get out to the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. Visit nlbm.com.
Yes,
to get
absolutely.
that apparel, to pick up those books, those 2 books mentioned, to support the museum. And then when it reopens, we have to get out there and visit it. So thank you again, Bob, for your time. We, on behalf of NCBMP, we just want to thank you for your support. And to those on the line, we have a little special gift. For the first 3 who did all of those 3 things that I mentioned in the beginning. You filled out your attendee profile, you filled out your attendee card, you visited the virtual booths. We're going to make sure we get in contact to send you a special gift on behalf of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. I'm assuming it may be something that says Monarchs, but it could be
real.
But make sure you go out and pick up all of those things. Remember that this has been recorded, so you'll be able to revisit this and see it again. And also, everyone, please visit the virtual tour and see all of the videos from all of the museums. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. We're back tomorrow and with the Muhammad Ali Institute. So please come back tomorrow and hear another great conversation with another great museum in this country. And then also please follow us on Facebook at NCBMP, at the National Coalition of Black Meeting Planners. And also we are on Instagram as well. Lastly, if you found anything inspiring that you want to post, make sure you use the hashtag #BeInspiredNCBMP. That's BeInspiredNCBMP. We are thankful for this conversation, Bob, and thank you all for joining us tonight. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening.
Thanks, everybody.